Welcome back to another deep dive. We're shifting gears slightly today, but staying firmly grounded in the absolutely essential world of data governance.
That's right. And for this one, think of it more like, well, Data Governance Unplugged.
Exactly. And a very special welcome today to the business analytics graduate students joining us from the University of Ghana Business School. Professor Richard Boateng convened this session, so it's truly great to have you with us.
Yeah, welcome everyone. We're tackling a really crucial topic today, something that's going to directly impact your careers right here in Ghana.
Definitely. For those who were with us last time, you'll remember we explored data governance frameworks.
Right. We looked at Apex Health as a case study, seeing how organizations structure their approach to managing data internally, the policies, the roles, the procedures.
And today, our mission, and this was a specific request from Professor Richard to support your studies, is to take a really deep dive into the foundational legal landscape for data handling right here in Ghana.
We're talking about the Data Protection Act, 2012. You'll often see it referred to as Act 843.
We've got the act itself right here as our primary source for this deep dive.
And it really is a fascinating document, quite detailed, meticulously laying out the rules of the road for processing personal information in the country.
You should think of this whole exercise as getting a detailed, really authoritative map of the legal territory. You need this before you even think about building data systems, running complex analytics, or, deploying AI models that use personal data.
Absolutely. Understanding this act inside and out, it's vital for anyone working with data in Ghana, especially you folks in business analytics. You're constantly dealing with sensitive stuff, customer data, employee info, operational details.
And it's not just about avoiding fines or legal trouble, though that's important too. It's really the essential blueprint for ethical, responsible, and frankly, sustainable data practices.
Couldn't agree more. So let's get into it. Let's unpack this important piece of legislation and really understand its core components, maybe starting with the basic structure it sets up.
Good idea. Let's start at the very beginning. What is the Data Protection Act, 2012? And how does it relate to the Data Protection Commission? Sometimes people mix these up.
Yeah, that's a really crucial distinction to make right up front. So the Act 843, which Parliament passed and got assent back in 2012, is the law itself. It's the legislation.
Okay, the rule book.
Exactly. And its purpose is stated clearly right there in the preamble. It's established to, 1, create a data protection commission, 2, protect the privacy of individuals and their personal data by regulating how it's processed, and 3, provide the detailed process for how personal info should be obtained, held, used, or disclosed.
Right, so the Act is the legislative instrument, the rule book outlining the what and the why of data protection requirements. So then the Data Protection Commission.
The commission is the body. It's the institution that the Act itself establishes to implement and enforce that law. If you look at Section 1, subsection 1, it explicitly says there is established by this Act a Data Protection Commission.
Oh, okay.
So this commission is the operational arm. It's responsible for making the Act work in practice, for monitoring compliance, overseeing its provisions across the country.
Got it. So Act, its rules, commission, enforcer, and overseer. That makes sense. What does the commission actually do then to achieve its purpose? What are its functions?
Well, Section 2 outlines the Commission's core object, which, like you said, mirrors the Act's purpose: protect privacy and personal data by regulating processing, and provide the process for data handling.
Okay.
To achieve that, Section 3 lists its specific functions. First, they have to implement and monitor compliance with the Act's provisions. So they're actively watching, checking if data controllers are following the rules, maybe receiving notifications, conducting audits, that sort of thing.
And they also make the necessary administrative arrangements for their own duties, like setting up their internal workings.
Absolutely. That's in Section 3B. And critically, Section 3C says they must investigate any complaint under the Act and determine it in a manner they consider fair.
So if I, as an individual, think a company has misused my data, I can complain to the commission.
Exactly. You lodge a formal complaint, and the commission has the power to investigate and make a determination. And finally, Section 3D gives them the vital function to keep and maintain the data protection register.
The register. We'll definitely come back to that. Sounds important.
It is very important public record.
So how is this commission actually run? Day-to-day, who's in charge, and how is it governed overall?
Right. The administration sections, mainly sections 11 through 13, lay this out. There's an executive director,
Okay.
appointed by the president following Article 195 of the Constitution. This person is key operationally. They're responsible for the day-to-day admin of the commission. They answer to the board, and they implement the board's decision.
And there are requirements for this role.
Yes. Section 11(3) specifies they need to be of high moral character, integrity, and have relevant qualifications and experience. It's a significant leadership position.
And can they delegate tasks? I mean, they must need help.
Yes, they can delegate functions. Section 12(3) allows that. But importantly, it also says they retain the ultimate responsibility. Accountability stays with the leader.
Makes sense.
And the commission appoints other necessary staff too, Section 13(1). They can also get public officers transferred or seconded from other government bodies, Section 13(2).
So they can bring in people from elsewhere in government.
Exactly. And they can engage advisors and consultants, if the board recommends it, Section 13(3), to get specialized expertise when needed.
Okay, so the executive director runs the day-to-day operations.
Yeah.
But you mentioned a board. They provide the strategic direction and oversight.
Precisely. Section 4 establishes the board as the governing body. And its structure is quite interesting. It's appointed by the president, Section 4(2), and it's designed to have really broad representation.
From where?
From key institutions involved in data, communications, human rights. Think National Communications Authority, NCA, the Commission on Human Rights and Administrative Justice, CHRAJ, Ministry of Communications, NIDA, Bank of Ghana, Statistical Service.
Wow, that's a lot of different perspectives.
It is. Plus, there's a representative elected by the industry forum, 2 presidential nominees, at least one must be a woman, and the executive director is also on the board.
That broad representation really suggests they wanted diverse viewpoints, right? Technical, human rights, government, industry, all feeding into data protection policy.
That seems to be the intent. And the board's main job, Section 4(3), is ensuring the proper and effective performance of the commission's functions.
And they have rules for how they operate. Meetings, conflicts of interest?
Yes, the Act details that. There are tenure limits for appointed members in Section 5. They have to meet at least quarterly, according to Section 6. Section 7 covers disclosure of interests, very important for integrity. And Section 8 allows them to set up committees for specific tasks.
Like maybe technical reviews or handling complaints?
Could be. And Section 9 says members get allowances approved by the minister responsible for finance.
Okay, and there's a connection to the government ministry.
Yes. Section 10 allows the minister responsible for communications to give policy directives to the board. So while the commission aims for operational independence, there's a link for broader policy direction, connecting it to national strategies.
Right, an important balance to strike. Now, the practical question, where does the money come from? To pay staff, run investigations, maintain that register?
Good question. Section 14 details the funds of the commission. It includes monies approved by Parliament, so public budget allocation.
Okay.
Donations and grants for its activities, maybe from development partners or others supporting data protection. Monies that accrue from its own functions, presumably things like registration fees.
So they can generate some income.
Potentially. And any other monies approved by the Minister for Finance. So it's a mix.
And they have to account for this money.
Absolutely. Financial accountability is crucial. Section 15 requires the board to keep proper accounts, and they get audited annually by the Auditor General.
And report back.
Yes. Section 16 mandates annual reports covering everything they did, including the Auditor General's findings. These go first to the minister, then to Parliament. Ensures transparency and oversight.
Okay, so summing up this first part, the Act is the law, the Commission is the body making it happen. It's got an executive director for operations, overseen by a diverse board, funded publicly and maybe through fees, with clear accountability through audits and reports. That really sets the stage for how the law is put into action.
Exactly. It's a whole institutional and legal engine behind data protection in Ghana.
Right. Now let's get into the real substance, the heart of what the Act actually requires when you're handling personal data. You mentioned it's built on principles.
Yes, fundamental data protection principles. Section 17 lists 8 of them that anyone processing data must take into account to ensure individual privacy.
And processing is basically anything you do with data.
Pretty much. The definition in Section 96 is really broad. It covers collection, recording, organizing, storing, adapting, altering, retrieving, consulting, using, disclosing, sharing, combining, blocking, erasing, destroying. Whether automated or not, if you touch personal data, you're likely processing it.
Wow, okay, so these 8 principles guide all of that. What are they?
Accountability, lawfulness of processing, specification of purpose, compatibility of further processing with the original purpose, quality of information, openness or transparency, data security safeguards, and data subject participation.
That's quite a list. For our audience, the business analytics students, some of these probably hit closer to home in your day-to-day work, right? Building models, managing data pipelines.
Definitely. Let's focus on a few key ones that are super relevant for BA. Privacy and lawfulness, minimality, consent, along with justification and objection collection rules, and data retention.
Sounds good. Let's start with privacy and lawfulness, Section 17B and Section 18.
This is the absolute bedrock. Section 18.1 says any processing of personal data must be lawful and reasonable. And crucially, it must not infringe on the data subject's privacy rights.
So for any data you touch, collect, analyze, use in a model, you have to ask, is there a valid legal reason for processing this specific data? And are we handling it reasonably, respecting the person's privacy?
Exactly. For you as BA students, it means understanding the legal justification before you start your analysis. You can't just assume that because you have access to data, it's fair game to use it however you want.
Does this apply even if the data came from outside Ghana?
Yes. Section 18.2 specifically mentions that personal data from foreign jurisdictions sent here for processing must also comply with the data protection laws of that foreign place. So it's quite broad.
So ensuring your data sources and processing activities are legally sound, not just technically possible, is step one. Check user agreements, internal policies based on the Act, get legal advice if needed.
Precisely. It has to be grounded in a valid legal basis, consent, contract necessity, legal obligation, legitimate interest, whatever the Act allows.
Okay, next principle, minimality, Section 19. This sounds very relevant to analytics.
It really is. It's all about data efficiency and necessity. The principle states that personal data should only be processed if it is necessary, relevant, and not excessive for the specific purpose you're processing it for.
Not excessive. That's huge. It means you shouldn't just grab every bit of data you can find, right? No data hoarding.
Exactly. You shouldn't collect, store, or use more data points or more detailed data than you absolutely need to achieve your stated goal.
So if you're building, say, a customer churn prediction model,
you only collect and use the data points actually necessary for that prediction, not every single piece of information you might have access to about the customer.
For the BA students listening, this means you need to critically evaluate every data point, every feature you consider for a model, every data set you request. Ask yourself, do I really need this specific demographic detail, or can I achieve my analytical goal with less personal information, or maybe even aggregated data?
And adhering to minimality isn't just about compliance. It significantly reduces privacy risks. Less data means less potential impact from a breach. It often improves data quality, too, by focusing on what's truly relevant.
Makes sense. Okay, moving on to consent, justification, and objection. Section 20. This is one people probably see most often, consent pop-ups on websites, right?
Often, yes. Generally, Section 21 requires you to get prior consent from the data subject before processing their personal data. And that consent needs to be freely given, specific, informed, unambiguous. The definition in Section 96 implies these qualities.
Well, it's not always needed. There are exceptions.
Yes. Important exceptions where processing is allowed without explicit consent, like when processing is necessary to perform a contract the person agreed to, or if it's authorized or required by law, think regulatory reporting.
Okay.
Or if it protects a legitimate interest of the data subject, maybe in a medical emergency where they can't consent, or if it's necessary for a public body performing a statutory duty.
What about the company's own interest?
That's another key exception. If processing is necessary to pursue the legitimate interest of the data controller or a third party, but, and this is crucial, that interest can be overridden by the individual's fundamental rights and freedoms, and the data subject can object.
That legitimate interest one sounds tricky, with the balancing test and the right to object. That right to object seems powerful.
It is. Section 22 gives the data subject the right to object to processing unless the law specifically says otherwise. And Section 23 is clear. If someone objects on reasonable grounds, the processing must stop.
So individuals have significant control, even if a company claims legitimate interest.
Exactly. For businesses, this means you need not only a valid legal basis like consent or legitimate interest before processing, but also a clear, easy way for people to object. And your systems have to be able to actually stop the processing when they do.
Right. Now, how about getting the data in the first place? Collection, sections 21, 22, 23.
The default rule, section 21.1, is direct collection. You should collect personal data directly from the person it's about.
That makes sense for transparency. They know they're giving you their data, but sometimes that's not possible.
Right. Section 21.2 allows indirect collection, getting data from somewhere else in several specific situations. If the data is already in a public record, like business registration details, or if the person deliberately made it public themselves, maybe on a public social media profile, or if they consented to indirect collection, or if getting it indirectly isn't likely to harm their legitimate interests.
What about official reasons?
Yes, indirect collection is also allowed if it's necessary for specific public interest purposes, crime prevention, tax collection, legal proceedings, national security, things like that. Or if direct collection would undermine a lawful purpose, like an investigation, or is just not reasonably practical.
So direct is preferred, but there are clear exceptions.
Exactly. But Section 22 adds another layer. Whenever you collect data, directly or indirectly, it must be for a purpose that is specific, explicitly defined, lawful, and directly related to your functions or activities as the data controller.
No vague data fishing allowed. You need a clear reason up front.
Precisely. And Section 23 reinforces transparency. The data controller has to take steps to ensure the data subject is aware of the purpose of collection. Ideally, when the data is collected, people need to know why you need their data. This is often done through a privacy notice.
Okay, purpose specification and transparency at collection. Now, what about keeping the data? Retention of records, Section 24, how long can you hold on to it?
This is vital for data lifecycle management and huge for analytics. The general rule in Section 24.1 is simple. You shouldn't keep personal data longer than is necessary to achieve the purpose for which you collected and processed it.
So, no keeping data forever just in case. This prevents that data swamp problem and reduces risk. Once the purpose is done, the data should ideally go.
That's the principle. But again, there are exceptions allowing longer retention. If it's required or authorized by law, think financial regulations needing records for 7 years or medical record laws.
Okay, legal requirements override the general rule.
Right. Or if it's reasonably necessary for a lawful function or activity, maybe managing ongoing customer relationships or handling potential legal disputes, or if required by a contract, or if the data subject consents to longer retention.
What about keeping data for research or statistics? That often needs long-term data.
Section 24.2 addresses that. The general rule doesn't apply to records kept only for historical, statistical, or research purposes. But Section 24.3 adds a condition. The data must be adequately protected against unauthorized access or use. So long-term retention for research is possible, but security is non-negotiable.
And there's a specific rule if you use the data to make a decision about someone.
Yes, Section 24. If you made a decision about someone based on their personal data, like a loan application outcome, you have to keep that record long enough for them to request access and potentially challenge the decision, either for a period set by law or a code of conduct, or just sufficient period if none is set. This links retention directly to their right of access.
And when the time is finally up, the purpose is fulfilled, the legal requirement expires, what happens then?
Section 24.5 is clear. The data controller must destroy, delete, or de-identify the record. And Section 24.6 adds that this destruction or de-identification must be done in a way that prevents the data from being reconstructed in an intelligible form.
So proper disposal is mandatory. No just leaving old data lying around.
Exactly. It's crucial for managing risk and respecting the end of the data lifecycle.
Okay, these principles, lawfulness, minimality, consent, collection rules, retention, they really form the core. Let's try to make this even more concrete. How might these apply in different sectors here in Ghana? Let's do those mini case studies.
Great idea. Let's start with mobile network operators, MNOs. They handle massive amounts of call records, location data, usage patterns.
Right. For them, lawfulness, Section 18, and specific purpose, Section 22, are absolutely paramount. They need a clear legal basis for processing all that data, probably linked to providing the communication service itself, billing, managing the network, or maybe meeting legal obligations like lawful interception requests.
And minimality, Section 19, is huge for MNOs. They should only collect and retain the data that's essential for those specific purposes, not engaging in indiscriminate tracking or collecting more than needed.
What about using data for, say, targeted marketing offers?
That would almost certainly require specific informed consent under Section 20. And Section 40 specifically demands prior written consent for direct marketing. Their retention periods, Section 24, for call data records have to comply with telecom regulations and the Act's no longer than necessary rule.
Okay, M&Os. How about government agencies? Collecting data for national IDs, taxes, services.
For them, collecting directly from the data subject, Section 21, should be the norm or practical. The purpose, Section 22, must be specific and lawful, tied directly to their statutory functions. Section 21 allows processing necessary for statutory duties. Data for an ID card is for identification, not other unrelated things without a separate legal basis.
But there are exceptions for government, right? National security, crime detection.
Yes, Sections 60 and 61 provide exemptions for things like national security, crime, taxation. These might affect how they collect data or the need for direct collection in certain law enforcement contexts. But the core principle of having a specific lawful purpose still applies. Retention, Section 24, needs to align with legal mandates for public records, balancing public interest with privacy.
E-commerce platforms, online retailers, they collect browsing history, purchase data, preferences, addresses.
For them, consent, Section 21, is often the key legal basis. Getting informed consent for specific purposes like personalizing recommendations, processing orders, or managing loyalty programs.
And minimality, Section 19.
Crucial. Do they really need to track every single click, or is purchase history and maybe stated preferences enough for good recommendations? Retention, Section 24 of purchase history, is justifiable for order tracking, warranties, returns, legal records, but they shouldn't keep it indefinitely once those purposes expire unless they have ongoing consent or another legal basis.
And promotional emails based on past purchases.
That's direct marketing. Needs prior written consent under Section 40. No question.
Healthcare institutions, they handle patient health records. That sounds sensitive.
Extremely. Health data is specifically defined as special personal data under Section 96, and its processing is governed by the stricter rules in Section 37.
So higher bar.
Much higher. Processing health data generally needs explicit consent or must be demonstrably necessary for specific reasons outlined in Section 37(2).
Like for actual medical treatment.
Exactly. Section 37(6)(e) specifically allows processing for medical purposes if done by a health professional under a duty of confidentiality. That provides a strong justification. Minimality, Section 19, means only accessing the health data relevant for the patient's specific diagnosis, treatment, or maybe necessary admin like billing. Retention, Section 24, is usually governed by specific medical record laws, and confidentiality, Section 85, is paramount.
Financial institutions. Banks. Insurance companies. Handling financial data, linking to credit bureaus.
Strict lawfulness, Section 18, and robust security, Section 28, under the Security Principle 17G, are non-negotiable. Minimality, Section 19, means collecting only what's needed for the financial service, credit assessment, fraud prevention, or regulatory compliance like KYC rules.
Consent.
Needed for new services or sharing data beyond the core purpose. But often the basis is necessity for the contract, opening the account, or meeting legal duties, Section 1. Retention, Section 24, is heavily dictated by financial regulations, often requiring records be kept for many years.
Media agencies. Journalism, they have exemptions, right?
Yes. Section 64 provides an exemption for processing data for journalistic, literary, or artistic purposes, especially if it's in the public interest. However, and this is key, Section 64(2) says this exemption doesn't excuse them from complying with core principles like lawfulness, minimality, quality of information, Section 26, and security, Section 28.
So they can do journalism, but they still have to get data lawfully, only take what's necessary for the story, aim for accuracy, and keep it secure.
Exactly. The exemption is for the purpose, not a free pass on responsible data handling.
Lastly, universities. Lots of student data applications, grades, health info sometimes.
Section 62 gives some exemptions for education records. But again, core principles generally apply. Purpose, Section 22, must be clear admission, education delivery, assessment, administration. Minimality, Section 19, is key. Don't collect excessive personal details beyond what's needed.
What about retention of student records?
Section 24 applies. Needs to align with administrative needs, like issuing transcripts later, and legal requirements. Sections 72 and 73 have specific exemptions for exam marks and scripts, suggesting different rules there, maybe for academic integrity. Lawfulness, Section 18, comes from their function as an educational institution.
Okay, this really brings it home. Connecting this back to you, the business analytics student listening, every single piece of data you touch, every data set you request, every feature you engineer for a model, every report you create using personal data, you have to think about these principles.
Are you processing lawfully? Is the data minimal for your specific analytical goal? For example, if you're building that customer segmentation model, are you using only the data truly necessary for segmentation or just pulling in everything available?
Do you have the right consent or another legal basis to use that data in that specific way? And how long should you keep this data after the analysis is done or the project ends?
Understanding these principles isn't just about ticking a legal box. It's the absolute foundation of ethical, responsible, and sustainable data practice. It directly impacts your technical choices, data collection methods, database design, feature selection, pipeline architecture. It has to be baked in.
That makes it very concrete. These aren't just abstract legal ideas. They have real practical implications for designing and running analytics projects. Okay, so we understand the principles governing how data should be handled. But who exactly has these obligations? Who is bound by these rules?
The Act primarily regulates data controllers. We touched on this, but Section 96 defines a data controller as a person could be an individual or an organization who, alone or with others, determines the purposes for and the manner in which personal data is processed or will be processed.
Well, the entity making the key decisions about the why and how of data handling.
Exactly. They're the ones the Act imposes most obligations on. And a critical obligation for most data controllers operating in Ghana is registration with the Commission. We mentioned this earlier, Section 27.1, Section 46.3, make it mandatory.
Not optional. And Section 53 explicitly prohibits processing personal data without being registered.
And Section 56 adds teeth. Failure to register is an offense. It carries significant penalties, up to 250 penalty units or 2 years imprisonment or both.
Penalty units, how much is that roughly?
Well, the value can change, but as of early 2023, one penalty unit was 12 Ghana cedis. So 250 units would be GHS 3,000.
Okay, maybe not huge for a large company, but...
Yeah. But combine that with the potential for 2 years imprisonment for the people responsible. It shows failure to register is taken very seriously. It's not just a minor administrative oversight.
Point taken. So registration is crucial. What does the application process actually involve? What information do you need to give the Commission?
Section 47 details this, and it's pretty comprehensive. They need to understand what you're doing with data. You need to provide your business name and address.
That's standard stuff.
Right. And if you're an external company not incorporated in Ghana, you need the name and address of your representative here in Ghana.
Okay. What about the data itself?
You have to describe the personal data you plan to process and the categories of data subjects, customers, employees, students, patients, whoever, Section 47(1)(c).
And you have to flag sensitive data.
Yes. Critically, you must state whether you hold or are likely to hold special personal data, Section 47(1)(d). This immediately signals higher risk to the Commission. You also have to clearly state the specific purpose for processing, Section 47(1)(e), tying back to that principle.
Transparency seems key, too. You mentioned sharing.
Yes. You need to identify who you intend to disclose the data to, the recipients or types of recipients, Section 47(1)(f). Also, which countries you might transfer data to, if any, Section 47(1)(g). And the class or names of people whose data you hold, Section 47(1).
Okay.
Section 47(1)(pi) requires a general description of the security measures you'll take. Plus, the Commission can ask for any other relevant info they need, Section 47(1)(j).
And lying on the application is a bad idea.
Very bad. Section 47(2) makes knowingly supplying false or misleading information an offense itself. Penalties up to 150 penalty units, GHS 1,800, or 1 year imprisonment, or both. Accuracy is vital.
What if a company processes data for lots of different reasons?
Section 47(3) says if a controller processes data for multiple distinct purposes, the Commission might make separate entries in the register for each one. Helps clarity.
So you submit this detailed application. Is registration automatic if the form is filled out correctly?
Not necessarily. Section 48(1) gives the Commission grounds to refuse registration. For example, if the details provided are insufficient for them to judge compliance.
Or if the safeguards aren't good enough.
Right, if appropriate safeguards for privacy haven't been provided, Section 48(1)(b). Or, interestingly, if, in the Commission's opinion, the applicant doesn't merit registration, Section 48(1)(c).
Doesn't merit registration. That sounds quite discretionary. What might that cover? Past bad behavior, risky processing plans.
It seems to allow the Commission to look beyond just the paperwork, maybe consider the applicant's track record, the nature of the proposed processing, potential risks. If they refuse, Section 48(2) says they must inform the applicant in writing within 14 days, giving reasons.
Is there an appeal process?
Yes, Section 48(2)(b). The applicant can seek judicial review at the High Court. So the Commission's decision can be challenged. And a refusal doesn't stop you from reapplying later, maybe after fixing the issues, Section 48(3).
If the Commission is happy, what happens?
Section 49(1) says they register the applicant and provide a certificate once a prescribed fee is paid, Section 49(2). That certificate is your proof.
And it lasts forever.
No, Section 50 requires renewal every 2 years, keeps the register updated, and likely involves another fee.
Can registration be canceled?
Yes. The Commission can remove a name at the person's request, Section 51, maybe if they stop processing data. Or they can cancel registration for good cause, Section 52.
And good cause means?
The definition in Section 96 clarifies failing to comply with the data protection principles or failing to comply with Commission notices or orders. So ongoing noncompliance after registration can get you kicked off the register, making your processing illegal.
Okay, this whole registration process is clearly central. It links to the Commission's duty to maintain that data protection register, Section 46. Understanding how to get on it, what's required, the Commission's role as gatekeepers, and the serious consequences of not being on it. That's vital for any organization handling personal data in Ghana.
Absolutely. For BA students, it's about understanding the legal framework your future employer must operate within.
You mentioned something called accessible processing, Section 57. What's that?
Right. This is a category of processing specified by the minister via an executive instrument that's considered particularly high risk. Processing likely to cause substantial damage or distress or significantly prejudice privacy rights.
So, things needing extra scrutiny.
Exactly. When a controller applies for registration, the Commission checks if their planned activities include this accessible processing, Section 572. If yes, they do a specific assessment on whether that processing complies with the Act.
And you can't just start doing it.
Generally, no. Section 57(5) says you usually can't carry out accessible processing until the Commission notifies you it's likely compliant, or a set period passes, initially 28 days, extendable, without them objecting.
And doing it without approval is an offense.
Yes, Section 57's. So high-risk activities get reviewed up front before they can begin.
One more thing on this section. Section 58 mentions appointing a data protection supervisor.
Yes, controllers may appoint one. It's optional for most. This person acts like an internal monitor or auditor for data protection compliance. They can be an employee, Section 58(5), but need to meet Commission criteria for qualifications, Section 58(6)(7). It can be a very useful role, especially for larger organizations.
Okay, so registration creates transparency via the public register, helps the Commission monitor activities, flags high-risk processing for upfront review, and enforces accountability through penalties.
That sums it up well. It's the operational mechanism making controllers visible and accountable under the Act.
Right. We've covered the obligations on data controllers, the who and what they must do. But a huge part of data protection is empowering individuals, the data subjects, the people whose data it is. Section 96 defines them as the individual subject to the personal data. The Act gives them significant rights.
Absolutely. Sections 35 through 44 lay these out comprehensively. And Section 34 makes it clear these rights are in addition to any other information rights people have under other Ghanaian laws. They really give individuals agency over their data.
What's the most fundamental right? Is it accessing your own data?
That's often the starting point. The right of access to personal data in Section 35 is key. It allows a data subject to make a written request to a data controller.
And what must the controller do?
Several things, according to Section 35(1). First, they have to confirm if they are processing your personal data at all, or if someone else is doing it for them. Just a simple yes/no.
Step 1, do you even have my data?
Exactly. Then, if they do have it, they must give you a description of the data they hold about you, explain the purpose they're processing it for, and identify the recipients or types of recipients they might share it with.
So what data, why, and who sees it?
Yes, and crucially, they must communicate the personal data itself to you in an intelligible form, something you can actually understand, not just database codes, Section 35(1). And they have to tell you the source of the data if they know it, Section 35(1)(c)(2).
Now, here's a really interesting one, especially for analytics and AI. What if a decision significantly affecting me was made solely by an automated system?
Section 35(1)(d) addresses that. The controller must inform you of the logic or rationale behind that automated decision.
Wow. So I can ask why the algorithm decided what it did about my loan application or insurance quote?
That's the intent. It's a powerful right for transparency in automated decision-making. However, there's a caveat in Section 35(2). This specific right doesn't apply if revealing the logic would expose a trade secret. So there's a balance with business confidentiality.
How do you make this access request?
You usually need to provide proof of identity, sections 32, 135(3), so they give the data to the right person. You might have to pay a prescribed fee, section 32(2), and the request should be reasonable in terms of time, manner, and format, section 32(2).
What if my data is mixed up with someone else's, like my record mentions a family member? Can they refuse access because of that?
Section 35(4) deals with this. They generally shouldn't comply if it means disclosing identifiable data about another individual, unless that other person consents, or it's reasonable in all circumstances to comply without their consent.
Reasonable. How do they decide that?
Section 35(8) gives factors. Any duty of confidentiality owed to the other person, efforts made to get their consent, their capacity to consent, and if they expressly refused, it's a balancing act.
But they can't just refuse my whole request because someone else is mentioned. They still have to give me my data.
Absolutely not. Section 35(6) says they must provide the information about you that can be communicated without revealing the other person's identity, maybe by redacting names or other identifiers. Section 35(7). The goal is your access while protecting others.
How quickly do they have to respond?
Section 35(10) sets a firm deadline, within 40 days of receiving the request. If they miss this or refuse improperly, the Commission can order them to comply, Section 35(11).
And you should get a copy you can keep.
Yes, the info should be supplied in a permanent copy form if you ask, Section 35(12). And controllers don't have to deal with identical requests too frequently. Section 3538-14 allows for a reasonable interval based on the data's nature and how often it changes, prevents harassment.
Are there special rules for credit bureaus, Section 36?
Yes, building on the Credit Reporting Act. Access requests might be limited to data from the past 12 months unless you ask for more, Section 36(2). You generally can't get data held beyond the Credit Reporting Act's retention period, Section 36(3), and bureaus must give you a statement of your rights under both acts, Section 36(4).
Okay, access is key. What other rights do individuals have? Can I stop a company from processing my data?
Yes, the right to prevent processing in Section 39. You can notify a controller in writing anytime to stop or not start processing your data for a specific purpose or in a specific way if that processing causes or is likely to cause unwarranted substantial damage or distress to you.
Unwarranted substantial damage or distress, that sounds like a high bar, not just minor annoyance.
It suggests a significant negative impact is needed. The controller has 21 days to respond, saying if they'll comply or giving reasons why not. Maybe the processing is legally required, Section 39(2). If they refuse wrongly, the Commission can step in, Section 39(3).
What about stopping junk mail or spam calls, direct marketing?
There's a specific, very strong right for that in Section 40. The right to prevent processing for direct marketing. First, controllers need your prior written consent to even use your data for direct marketing, Section 41.
Prior written consent, that's quite specific.
It is, and even if you gave consent previously, Section 42 gives you the absolute right at any time to notify them in writing to stop processing your data for direct marketing purposes.
And they have to stop.
Yes. Failure to comply can lead to a Commission order, Section 43. Direct marketing is defined broadly in Section 40, any advertising or marketing material sent to specific individuals by any means. For BA students doing customer segmentation for marketing, this section is vital. You need that prior consent and a system to handle opt-outs immediately.
We touched on automated decisions earlier with access. Section 41 gives more rights in relation to automated decision-taking.
Yes. You have the right to require a controller to ensure that decisions significantly affecting you, think, jobs, credit, insurance, are not based solely on automated processing, Section 41(1).
So you can demand a human look at it.
Essentially, yes, for those crucial decisions. If such a decision is made solely automatically, Section 412 says they must notify you, and you then have 21 days to require them to reconsider the decision. They must respond within another 21 days, Section 41(3).
Are there exceptions?
Yes, if the automated decision is necessary for a contract with you or required by law, Section 41(3). But for many important algorithm-driven decisions, this right provides a human check. Again, the Commission can order compliance, Section 41(5).
What about data held in old filing cabinets? Manual data, Section 42.
Good point. You have rights even for exempt manual data in physical files not easily searchable. Section 42(1) lets you require a controller to rectify, block, restrict processing, erase, or destroy inaccurate or incomplete manual data or data held incompatibly with their legitimate purposes.
Same principle, different format.
Exactly. Your notice needs reasons, Section 42. And the Commission can enforce it, Section 42(3). The principles cover personal data regardless of format.
And if a company breaks these rules and I suffer because of it?
Section 43(1) says you are entitled to compensation from the data controller for any damage or distress caused by their violation of the Act. It provides a legal remedy.
Is there a defense for the company?
Yes, Section 432. It's a defense if they can prove they took reasonable care in all the circumstances to comply with the Act. This really highlights why having good policies, procedures, training, and security is so important it can be a legal defense.
Finally, can the Commission itself order data to be fixed or deleted?
Yes, Section 441. If they investigate a complaint and find data is inaccurate, they can order the controller to rectify, block, erase, or destroy it.
Even if the data is technically accurate but misleading?
Yes, Section 44(2)(3) covers that. If data needs supplementing with true facts to avoid being misleading, the Commission can order that too, like adding context to an accurate but incomplete record.
And if data gets corrected, do others who receive the wrong info get told?
Section 4-5 says the controller may be required to notify third parties who receive the inaccurate data if it's reasonably practicable. Helps correct the record more widely.
Thinking about all these rights access, stopping processing, challenging automated decisions, getting compensation, ensuring accuracy, they're powerful tools for individuals.
You really are.
And for you, the future business analytics professionals, you have to think about building systems that enable these rights. Can your analytics platform, your database, your pipelines easily confirm if you hold data on someone? Can it generate an intelligible copy for them?
Can your systems effectively action a deletion request or a marketing opt-out while still meeting other legal needs like audit trails? Can you actually explain in simple terms how your algorithm made a significant decision about someone?
These rights impose real technical and operational requirements. Building privacy by design and privacy by default into your analytics infrastructure isn't just good practice. It's necessary to comply with these rights.
Absolutely. It's about operationalizing the law within your tech stack and processes. Understanding these rights is fundamental to building compliant and trustworthy systems.
Okay, let's shift to a particularly sensitive area. The Act recognizes some types of personal data need even greater protection because misusing them could cause serious harm or discrimination. Special personal data.
Yes, defined in Section 96. And Section 37(1) lays down the general rule. Processing this type of data is prohibited unless specific conditions are met.
Prohibited. That's strong. What categories fall under this special classification?
Section 96, referenced by Section 37(1), lists data relating to a child under parental control recognizing minors' vulnerability, religious or philosophical beliefs, ethnic origin or race, trade union membership, political opinions, health, which is defined broadly to include physical, medical, mental health, DNA, genetic data.
Very broad health definition.
Yes. Also, sexual life or sexual orientation.
Yeah.
And data about the commission or alleged commission of an offense or related criminal proceedings or sentences.
That covers a lot of highly personal, potentially sensitive, and often grounds for discrimination historically. So processing this is banned unless,
according to Section 37(2), the processing is necessary or the data subject gives explicit consent. Consent for special data needs to be even clearer and more informed than for regular personal data.
Necessary seems to be a recurring theme as a justification. Does the Act give examples of what's considered necessary for special data?
Yes, Section 37(3)(6) provide examples. For an employer, it might be necessary to process health data to manage legally required sick leave or occupational health duties, Section 37(3).
Okay, employment law context.
It might be necessary to protect the person's vital interests if they can't consent, like emergency medical treatment for someone unconscious, Section 37(4).
Nonprofits, political parties, unions, religious groups.
Section 37(5) allows them to process relevant special data about their members or regular contacts if it's for their legitimate activities, and they don't disclose it to third parties without consent. Lets them function internally but restricts external sharing.
What about legal or medical fields? They often handle this type of data.
Crucial exceptions there. Processing special data is considered necessary for legal proceedings, getting legal advice, establishing or defending legal rights, or administering justice, Section 37(6) allows lawyers to handle relevant sensitive data for cases.
And medical.
Section 37(6) is key. Processing for medical purposes is presumed necessary if done by a health professional under a duty of confidentiality. And Section 37(7) defines medical purposes very broadly: preventative medicine, diagnosis, research, care, treatment, healthcare management. This is the core basis for healthcare providers.
Are there rules specifically about race or ethnic data?
Yes, Section 37(8). Processing data on race or ethnic origin is only allowed if it's necessary to identify and eliminate discriminatory practices and requires appropriate safeguards. Section 37(9) lets the minister prescribe more safeguards. It's carefully controlled.
And Section 38 gives a specific exemption for religious or philosophical beliefs.
Right, allowing religious or spiritual organizations to process relevant data for their members or employees if needed for their aims. But even then, individuals can still ask how their data is being processed, Section 382.
For our business analytics students, understanding this category of special personal data is absolutely critical, especially if you end up in healthcare, finance may be dealing with criminal history checks or politically exposed persons lists.
Or insurance handling health data, HR dealing with ethnicity, union status, health, even market research touching on beliefs or ethnicity.
The Act puts a much, much higher bar here. Necessity has to be clearly demonstrated and documented, linked to a specific legal basis like those exceptions. Or you need explicit informed consent under very specific conditions.
You can't process this data just because it seems analytically interesting or might help a model unless you meet these strict legal criteria and have proper safeguards. Building a model predicting health outcomes might be valuable, but the legal basis for using that health data, Section 37 and S6, or explicit consent, and the security must be locked down first.
It adds a major layer of legal and ethical diligence. A much more cautious, justified approach is needed for this type of information.
Definitely. It demands careful consideration.
Okay, we've mentioned it a few times. Let's circle back and look more closely at the Data Protection Register itself, Section 46.
Right. Established by the Act, Section 46(1), maintained by the Commission, Section 46(2), its main purpose is to list the registered data controllers operating in Ghana, Section 46(1). This reinforces why registration under Section 46(3) is so fundamental for most controllers.
So it's basically a public list containing the key info controllers provide when they register.
Exactly. The details from Section 47(1) make up the entries: business identity, representative details, description of data types and subjects, whether special data is processed, the purposes of processing, intended recipients, transfer destinations, and a general description of security measures. And remember, potentially separate entries for different purposes, Section 47(3).
And a key feature is public access, Section 54.
Yes, transparency. The Commission must provide facilities for the public to inspect the register, Section 5431.
So anyone can look it up.
That's the idea. And they must supply certified copies of entries if requested upon payment of a fee, Section 542. This allows individuals, researchers, businesses, checking on partners, anyone interested to see who is registered to process data, what kind, for what purpose, and generally what security they claim to have. It's a public record of accountability.
And it needs to be kept up to date.
Yes, registered controllers have a duty under Section 55 to notify the Commission of any prescribed changes to their registered details within 14 days.
So if they start processing a new type of data or change their purpose,
they need to update the registration details to keep the public register accurate and useful.
And we already established processing data without being on this register is prohibited, Section 53, and an offense, Section 56.
Correct. It really underlines the register's importance. It's not just a list, it's a mandatory requirement for lawful data processing by most entities in Ghana.
That concept of accessible processing, the high-risk stuff, Section 57, is also linked to registration right, because the Commission reviews it during the application.
Exactly. Section 572 links them. The registration process helps flag these activities for necessary upfront assessment.
So for business analytics professionals, the register is a practical tool. You can use it to potentially identify registered controllers you work with or for, understand the stated scope of their data activities, and see the level of transparency the Act demands. Being listed signifies a basic level of compliance.
It's a central piece of the whole enforcement puzzle and a public signal of who has met the basic registration requirement.
Wow, okay. We have really covered a huge amount of ground in this deep dive into Ghana's Data Protection Act, 2012.
We certainly have. We started with the basic structure of the Act, creating the Commission, defining its purpose, its functions, how it's administered with the executive director and the board, its funding, the whole institutional setup.
Then we dove deep into those fundamental principles: lawfulness, minimality, consent and objection, the rules around collection, and crucially, data retention and destruction obligations. We tried to bring those alive with examples across different sectors, from M&Os and government to healthcare, finance, and universities, highlighting the direct impact on your work as BA students.
We walked through the critical process of registering as a data controller, the detailed information needed, the Commission's gatekeeper role and power to refuse, the need for renewal, and the possibility of cancellation for good cause. We also clarified the penalties involved.
And importantly, we examined the powerful rights the Act gives to individuals, the data subjects: the right to access their data, including understanding automated decision logic, the rules around third-party data and access requests, the ability to prevent processing, especially for direct marketing or if it causes distress.
The rights around automated decisions demanding reconsideration, rights even for manual data, the right to compensation if harmed by violations, and the reasonable care defense, plus the Commission's power to order corrections or deletions. We stressed how building systems to enable these rights is crucial for data professionals.
We also spent time on the very stringent rules for handling special personal data, defining what falls into that category from children's data to health and criminal records, and outlining the limited conditions like clear necessity or explicit consent under which processing is allowed. That higher bar is so important to understand.
And finally, we highlighted the Data Protection Register itself, its role as a central public record, its contents, public accessibility, the duty to keep it updated, and how being registered is fundamental to lawful processing.
This act really is a cornerstone for Ghana's digital economy and all the data-driven initiatives happening. For those of you in business analytics, seriously, understanding this legislation isn't just about ticking a compliance box, though ignoring it has real consequences.
It's fundamentally about building trust with the people whose data you're using. It's about mitigating significant operational and legal risks, and it's about operating ethically and sustainably as data becomes more and more central to business.
It directly shapes what data you can collect, how you can use it in your models and analysis, the security you must implement, and the serious responsibilities you have towards individuals throughout the entire data lifecycle.
Integrating these legal requirements into your technical methods, into your project designs right from the start, that's what makes you a responsible and effective data professional in Ghana.
Okay, let's leave you with a final thought to chew on, especially as you look towards the future of business analytics. We've been discussing an act from 2012. Since then, analytics techniques have exploded: machine learning, AI, predictive modeling, now generative AI. The volume and variety of data have grown exponentially.
So the question is, how can the principles and requirements laid out in this 2012 Act continue to provide effective protection for people's privacy in the face of these incredibly rapid technological changes?
And what's the ongoing responsibility for data controllers, and for you as future analytics professionals, to interpret and apply these principles like minimality, purpose specification, fairness, effectively and responsibly when you're using these cutting-edge tools? How do you ensure your advanced analytics stay compliant with the spirit, not just the letter, of a law drafted over a decade ago?
That's a really crucial question. It requires ongoing thought, adaptation, and a commitment to ethical practice as the technology evolves. The principles might be timeless, but applying them certainly isn't static.
Indeed. This has been our deep dive into the Ghana Data Protection Act, 2012. We sincerely hope it's given you a much clearer, more detailed, and practical understanding of this vital legal framework for working with data here in Ghana.